and welcome back. Are you ready for another day of fun? Are you ready for another day of math? Are you ready for another day of, I just learned something new? Then stay tuned. Okay, everyone, and welcome back. I am your lovely and gracious host, Audrey Codner-Gibson, the owner of ACG Math Tutoring, and I'm just sharing my math knowledge with you so you can achieve whatever goal that you want to fight for. So if it's passing a test, passing a class, or maybe even changing a career, whatever is possible, but we need to get through these foundational skills in order for us to achieve that goal. So, like always, I always like to share my screen so you can see what I see. So we are today going to be looking at solving equations involving those absolute values. Now, you're probably saying to yourself, absolute values, I've heard of that. I just remember that it was always positive, but I never understood why. So we're going to answer that question for you. So we're going to look at that Common Core Standards of CED.1, AREI.1, and AREI.3. So it's all dealing with my algebra, all right? So before we go into that, we're gonna look at the exit ticket from the last video. So we do a little distributive property, and we're also looking at combining those like terms. So if we take a look, we have 4 times n plus 3 equals 6n plus 8 plus 2n. So I studied last time. So we're going to distribute the 4 to the n plus 3. So we're going to distribute within its own parentheses. So 4 times n gives me 4n, plus 4 times 3 gives me 12. And then we have our equal sign. So now we need to look at what's going on the right side of this equal sign. So I'm going to kind of like do like a barrier. So we already combined what was happening on the left side. Now we're going to take a look what's on the right side. And if you notice, we have 6n and we have plus 2n. So those are like terms. So we can go ahead and combine them based on the operation that they're giving us, which is addition. So 6n plus 2n gives me 8n. And then I just bring down this plus 8. So now this should kind of look like the one when we had the variable on both sides of the equal sign. So now we want to put it all on one side of the equal sign. Should I put it on the left side or should I put it on the right side? It doesn't matter. But if you want to be consistent, I will honor the phases of all my great math teachers. Put it on the left-hand side. All right, fine. So since we have 8n, we're going to subtract the 8n from both sides. And when I do that, 8n minus 8n will give me 0. But we don't need that placeholder of 0 because we have this positive 8 that's still on the right-hand side. So now I'm going to bring down my positive 12. And then I'm going to combine my 4 minus 8n, which gives me a negative 4n. So now I'm keeping my n's on the left-hand side. So that means that 12 needs to go to the right-hand side. So I have a positive 12. So that means it's going to be a negative 12. So we're going to subtract 12 on both sides. So those cancel out, but it leaves me with my negative 4n. I'm going to bring down my equals, and I have my negative 4, because 8 minus 12 gives me that negative 4. So I don't want to know what negative 4n equals. I want to know what n equals. So negative 4n, that's multiplication. The inverse of multiplication is division. So I'm going to divide negative 4 on both sides, because negative 4 divided by negative 4 gives me a positive 1n, or just n. And then negative 4 divided by negative 4, that gives me 1. So my answer for this one should be 1. And if you got 1, good job, fist bump. Yes, check it out. All right. So we're going to take a look at what you should be asking yourself for today's lesson. I can solve equations involving absolute values. So again, we're going to define what an absolute value is. We're going to look at some guided notes, some examples, and do some practice before we do our exit ticket. So what is an absolute value? So let me move my lovely face out of the way. Maybe move it down here. Okay. So the absolute value of a number is the distance from 0 on the number line. So if I wanted to know what the absolute value of -4 is, so I want to know how far away is -4 from 0. So if I go, I got 1, 2, 3, 4. So it's going to be 4 units away from 0. So yes, yeah, I went into the negative direction. But if you notice, if someone says, oh, you need to walk back 4 blocks, are you going to walk those 4 blocks backwards? No, you're actually going to turn your body around, hopefully, walking, looking both sides across the streets, and then go on those 4 blocks. But I actually walked 4 blocks, or I actually took 4 steps. Even though I took it in the negative direction, I took 4 actual steps. So that's why a negative number is always going to be that number, but in the positive, because that's how far away it is from 0. So if I wanted to say what the absolute value of 4 is, so that means starting here at 0, let me kind of get this. I'll go 1, 2, 3, 4. Again, that's going to be 4 units. But that's going 4 units in the positive direction. So that's why the absolute value of 4 is going to be 4. So regardless of what happens in between the absolute values, so remember, this is your symbol for the absolute value, okay? Your answer is always going to be positive because that's how many difference or how many units it is away from 0, okay? So as I said, the absolute value is negative, it's never negative. In between the absolute value, it can be positive or negative, but your solution to it is always going to be positive, all right? So often an equation involving absolute values will have 2 solutions. So if you notice, -4 equals 4, and also +4 equals 4. So I have 2 different types of solutions, all right? So when we're solving, we don't mess around with what's in between the absolute values. So for example, I have the absolute value of x equals 7. So if I want to write them into 2 separate equations, my first equation is going to be x equals 7, just basically what I see without the absolute values. But the other equation is going to be x equals -7, okay? What I'm changing the sign of is what it is equal to. So since we already know what x equals, x can equal 7 and x equals -7 are my 2 solutions for this absolute value equation. So going to number 2, you're probably like, that's it? I'm like, yeah, pretty much. All right, so for number 2, you have the absolute value of 2x plus 4 equals 18. So let me move myself up here. So now I'm going to write out my 2 equations. So I have 2x plus 4 is equal to 18. So the first equation is basically everything that you see without the absolute values, all right? But the second equation is what you're going to write what's inside the absolute value. So my 2x plus 4. But this time it's not going to equal a positive 18. It's going to equal a negative 18. So now we got 2 equations that we need to solve for because we want to know what is the solution for x that's going to give me a true statement for positive 18 and a true statement for negative 18. So right here, I'm going to subtract 4 because I'm doing the inverse of addition. So then I have 2x is equal to 14. So then I divide both sides by 2. And then we have x is equal to 7. So if you're able to follow along just like that with me, I'm impressed. Because think about where you started from and think about where you are now. That's awesome. All right. So now we're going to do the same thing, but for the other equation, that 2x plus 4 is equal to negative 18. So we're still going to subtract 4 on both sides. So we still have my 2x is equal. But since both of them are negatives, that means my sign is going to be negative, and instead of subtracting, I'm going to add. So I got my 22. So now I want to divide both sides by 2. So now I have x is equal to negative 11. So what can make this into a true statement is my positive 7 and my negative 11. If you plugged it right back, if I have negative 11 is representing the x, so 2 times negative 11 gives me a negative 22, and negative 22 plus 4, that gives me my negative 18, but take a look. It's still inside the absolute value. So remember what we said about absolute values. It's the distance away from 0. So negative 18, that means it's all the way over here. If this is 0, okay, about here, this is negative 18. I am negative 18, or I'm 18 steps away from 0. So that means the absolute value of negative 18 is 18. So can 18 equal 18? Yes, that's a true statement. So that means this solution of x equals negative 11 does work for this situation. So let me erase. If I plug a 7 in for the x, so I have 2 times 7, which gives me 14, and 14 plus 4, that gives me 18, and we're talking about the absolute value of 18. So if this is 0 and this is positive 18, that means it's going to take me 18 steps to get from 0 to 18. So that's why we have the absolute value of 18 is equal to 18. Now, can 18 equal 18? Is that a true statement? Yes, it is. So that means x equals 7 is another solution for this absolute value. All right? So hopefully we're getting it. We're writing it out twice. One's going to deal with the positive solution, and one's going to deal with the negative solution. But what's in between the absolute value stays the same. All right? So we have 3 times the absolute value of x plus 5 is equal to 8. And you're saying, well, is the 3, wait, the 3 is not inside the absolute value. Exactly. So we're solving this, just like how we normally do. We want to isolate the variable. But right now, the variable is inside the absolute value sign. Treat it as the same. So my first step is I'm going to subtract 5 from both sides. So now I have 3 times the absolute value of x is equal to 3. So I want to get rid of this 3. This is multiplication. So the inverse of multiplication is division. So now we have the absolute value of x is equal to 1. And you're saying, well, are we done? Are we done? No, we need to write this out as 2 solutions. So that's why we're going to write it out as x equals 1. That's what we see. And the other one is going to be x equals negative 1. So since x is by itself, these are our 2 solutions, 1 and negative 1. If I substitute the 1 for the x, the absolute value of 1 is 1. 1 times 3 is 3. 3 plus 5 is 8. True statement. If I plug the negative 1 in for the absolute value of x, so that means the absolute value of negative 1 is 1. Remember, it's always positive. 3 times 1 is 3. 3 plus 5 is 8. And is that a true statement? Yes, it is. Okay? So that's why we have our 2 solutions. So for number 4, we just have this multiplication. Inside the absolute values, we got to keep. You can't touch it. Okay? So that means I have to go right into dividing 4. The reason why I'm dividing, because that 4, original 4, is being multiplied to the absolute value of 4 minus x. So now I have the absolute value of 4 minus x is equal to 4. So this one should look similar. Sorry, I'm going the wrong way. Should look similar to what we did for number 2. Okay? We're going to write what we see, and then we're going to give our solution a positive answer and a negative answer. So that means I'm going to write what I see, which is 4 minus x is equal to 4. And the other one is going to be 4 minus x. Remember, in between the absolute values, we don't change anything. But this time it's going to equal negative 4. So in order for me to solve this first equation, I'm going to subtract 4 on both sides. Then I have negative x is equal to 0 because I need this placeholder this time. These 4's over here can cancel out because they are going to give me 0, but I don't need to put the 0 over on this side because I have that negative x on that same side to worry about, okay? So now I got negative x is equal to 0. So we know that we could divide both sides by -1. And then negative and negative cancels out, leaving me with 1x or x. And 0 divided by any number will be 0. So now let's do the same thing, but this time we're looking at a result that's going to give me a -4. So we're going to subtract 4 on both sides. And then you have your negative x is equal to -8, okay? Just because we're doing the same process doesn't mean we're going to get the same solution, all right? So a -4 minus 4 gives me a -8. Then I want to divide both sides by -1. If you're asking me, where's the -1 coming from? If we don't see a number in between the negative sign and the x, it's always assumed that there's a 1 there. All right, so that's done and that's done. Then you have x equals negative divided by negative is a positive, and 8 divided by 1 gives me 8. All right, so quick practice. We're going to write what we see. 6 minus 2x is equal to 2, and 6 minus 2x is equal to -2. So we want to solve for x. So you're going to subtract 6 on both sides. Then you got -2x, because these cancel. -2x is equal to -4. Okay. Then we divide both sides by -2. Then you have x is equal to 2. So for the other side, we're still going to subtract 6 on both sides. We still have -2x is equal to, but this is what's different. -2 minus 6 gives me a -8. Divide both sides by -2. That means x is equal to 4. All right, so my two solutions that's going to give me this equals 2 is going to be a +2 and a +4. Okay, so now for the next one, we're going to subtract 13. So now you got your 7 absolute value of x is equal to my 21. Then we're going to divide both sides by just the 7. And the reason why we're doing that is so we can isolate our absolute value of x. So 21 divided by 7 gives me 3. But this is not my final answer. I want to know the positive and the negative of my solutions. So I'm going to have a +3, and I'm also going to have a -3. That's going to make this into a true statement. Okay? So as long as you remember that you have to give me two solutions when you're solving. There's always a positive version and also a negative version. All right? So here we go with the learning target. Did we hit it? I can solve equations involving absolute values. Now, did I also answer your question? What is an absolute value? It's basically the values on the number line, how far distance away from 0. Okay, so 0 is like your starting place, and then it's how far you are away from 0. So that's why your answer is always going to be positive. So we talked about that. We did our review. We did our definition, did some guidance and some practice. Now we got our exit ticket. So for this time, I'm going to move myself again. Very moving today, okay? So we have two questions. We have 3 times the absolute value of x plus 7 equals 28. And the absolute value of 3x plus 8 equals 29. So let's see how you do and share your stuff, share your answers. So like always, if you enjoy these videos or if you're really saying, you know what, I'm all right, it's not so bad, please like, subscribe, keep looking at the videos, and don't forget to share. We want the whole world to know everybody can do math. I'm a testimony for that. Okay, so like always, it's been very appreciative for everyone just taking your time out just to even watch my videos. I greatly appreciate that. And if anything, please continue on working, and I really like to see you next time. Take care.